Hello everyone. Today we will delve into two essential elements of fiction, setting and character. Let's get started with setting. Setting, the time and place of a story. It's one of the key elements of fiction. According to Judith, setting is all around us. It includes the physical, environmental, social, historical, political, and cultural contexts described in a story as the scene of its action. In Elif Shafak's 10 minutes 38 seconds in this strange world, Istanbul is one of the main settings. The novel begins by describing the final moments of Tequila Leila's consciousness as she transitions from life to death, inviting the reader into the mind of Tequila Leila. She is dying in a rubbish bin on the outskirts of Istanbul, an Istanbul quite different from the one depicted in travel brochures. Another significant setting in the novel is the cemetery of the companionless in Kilios, a graveyard for those shunned in death or who died alone. Each location in the novel contributes to the author's storytelling and our understanding of the story. Another example is Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, or its film adaptation by Baz Luhrmann. The novel and the film transport us into the glamour and glitter of the jazz age, portraying a great American success story while also highlighting themes of corruption. The Great Gatsby foreshadows the looming Great Depression of the 1930s. The theme and subject matter of the novel are so closely intertwined with its setting that it is impossible to imagine the story taking place anywhere else. Setting can also provide motivation and explanation for characters' actions and reveal the effects of their choices. For example, Jay Gatsby's mention his extravagant parties in The Great Gatsby serve as clear illustrations of this. Another good example can be found in George Orwell's Animal Farm. According to David L. Russell in Literature for Children, the setting in Animal Farm is symbolic, as it serves as a critique of totalitarianism. The story takes place on a farm where the conflicts among the animals reflect a broader context of political abuse and corruption in the modern world. Setting can be literal and realistic, or subjective, dreamlike, and full of symbolic suggestions, or even a combination of these. For example, in the fiction of Japanese author Haruki Murakami, many settings are dreamlike, blurring the line between reality and dreams and challenging the reader to make sense of this interplay. Additionally, setting can be realistic and conventional while also being highly symbolic. In Haruki Murakami's Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage, the physical journeys between Nagoya, Tokyo, and later Finland also represent inner journeys of the character. Another example is found in Jeremy Hawthorn's book Studying the Novel. Houghton cites the tuberculosis sanatorium in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain as an example of a setting. The sanatorium filled with sick people symbolizes pre-First World War Europe, reflecting its diseases and fatal illnesses. According to Judith, there are even stories where the setting can serve as a character in its own right. Ruth explains this concept as follows. The sea, untamed lands, the weather, and even buildings sometimes act as formidable foes, such as the weather in The Perfect Storm or the Arctic environment in Jack London's Stories of Human Struggle for Survival. David Fincher's thriller Panic Room is also interesting. In this film, Meg Altman is a newly divorced mother who buys an apartment on the Upper West Side. The apartment was formerly owned by a millionaire and has a panic room. This panic room is essentially a secure space designed to keep invaders or thieves out. When thieves break into the apartment, Meg and her daughter hide inside the panic room. In this context, the panic room as a setting can be interpreted as a critique of the paranoia we create and live through in our lives. Additionally, as Lynn Stoll argues, Panic Room critiques a society that prioritizes and commodifies the safety of the white upper class. Having discussed the setting in a story, I would now like to move on to characters as one of the essential elements of fiction. Characters are typically the people in a work of literary fiction, but they may also be the animals or other beings. They are generally categorized as either flat or round, meaning they can be simple or complex depending on the depth of their characterization. Characters can also be described as static or dynamic, depending on how much they change throughout the story. In some works, characters can also be the narrators of the story. Britannica, referring to the British author E.M. Forster, notes that flat characters are two-dimensional in that they are relatively uncomplicated and do not change throughout the course of a work. Such characters display only one side of their personalities. According to Gioia and Gwynn, flat minor characters are often stock characters, stereotypes who may be necessary to advance the plot, but otherwise are not deserving of more than the barest outlines of description. Some literary critics argue that these characters do not reflect human nature and are therefore not realistic. In contrast, round characters are complex and they undergo changes when they encounter various circumstances in the story. They evolve significantly throughout the narrative and they are depicted with a certain level of complexity. The reader often gains access to their unconscious minds, allowing them to feel as though they know the characters personally. However, before making any judgments about the characterization in a story, whether the characters are flat or round, or realistic or not, we need to consider the writer's purpose, the genre, and the conventions associated with that genre. For instance, in Charles Dickens's novels, many characters are flat because Charles Dickens uses them to highlight the social context of his time. For example, in Oliver Twist, Dickens's aim is to critique the exploitation of children during the Industrial Revolution in Britain, rather than to explore individual nature. When discussing characters, it's also useful to clarify terms such as protagonist, antagonist, and anti-hero. The characters who serve as the primary actors in a story are called protagonists. They initiate the main action of the story. For example, Rocky, James Bond, and Bridget Jones are protagonists in their respective films. They are the ones who motivate or lead the story. According to Judith, they are fully drawn and allow the reader to sympathize and identify with them. Antagonists, on the other hand, oppose the protagonist, and their actions conflict with the protagonist's goals or desires. Judith notes that while protagonists are usually human, Antagonists can sometimes be forces such as animals or nature. For instance, Jack London's stories often portray nature as an antagonist. In some books, protagonists can be more than one, and there may be shifts between them. This is evident in Haruki Murakami's 1Q84. In this story, Tango and Aomame serve as protagonists. Shifting protagonists add different viewpoints to the story and can encourage us to look at the story from different perspectives. Lastly, modern stories often feature protagonists who are anti-heroes. Unlike traditional heroes who are brave and strong, anti-heroes may be weak and cowardly. There is almost nothing heroic about them. The anti-hero is a satiric or realistic commentary on traditional portrayals of idealized heroes or heroines. An example of an anti-hero is Travis Bickle from Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. As Matthew J. Iannucci describes, Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, is an obsessed, inarticulate, and lonely anti-hero cab driver. And food for thought. Can you identify any anti-heroes in the award-winning TV series Game of Thrones and the film Deadpool? To what extent do you think they fit this role? And that wraps up our recording. Today I covered two key elements of fiction, setting and character. Thank you for watching.